Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest today is Speros Katos, a retired pharmacist. Well, Speros, welcome.
Thank you, Gavin.
So you've had a pretty interesting life. You've got Greek parents who arrived here when?
My father came here in 1920, my mother in 1927.
Yes.
Both from opposite sides of Greece, both from islands, as it were. They were. My mother was from the Ionian Island, the Aegean Islands. My father from one of the Ionian Islands, and of course there was a proxy marriage set up in 1935, and I was born out of that.
Wonderful.
Yeah, some of my Greek friends hardly believe that anyone came here before the Second World War, and I note that you had a bit of surprise in your voice as you said it.
My jaw dropped.
There were quite a few Greeks who came before the Second World War. That is, a minority, but they had enough to form a community, and probably from the beginning of the century, that is the 20th century, Greeks were here.
Wow. So they came and established what?
They would establish Greek communities,
yes,
and then a church, a Greek Orthodox church.
Oh, wonderful.
Would invariably be established,
yes,
as part of that community.
And which part of Melbourne was that where they first came?
Well, yeah, what part of Melbourne did they live in? Mainly South Melbourne, would you believe?
Yes.
Yep. It was quite a popular suburb for Greeks.
Yes.
It wouldn't be so now. But then I think South Melbourne was the Greek suburb, followed I think fairly closely by Fitzroy and Carlton.
Good.
You wouldn't think of them as Greek suburbs now, though.
No, things change over the years.
Yep.
You have a sister?
I do, yes indeed, a younger sister.
Yes. And she's involved in what area of life?
She is a great woman. She does a lot of kind of social work, unpaid, volunteer, counselling, supportive, and leads a very efficient or productive life.
Awesome. Now you've got, let me think, 3 children and 4 grandchildren?
Correct,
Okay.
Correct, yeah.
So that keeps you young?
Indeed, I've often felt young, even though I'm pretty close to 80 now, 80 this year sometime, but I feel much younger than that. And we've got wonderful communion with our children and our grandchildren. We see them often.
Okay, now you studied where here in Australia?
Well, when I finished high school, I decided I would do pharmacy. There was only one college then, and there still is, and that was in the centre of the city, in the CBD. An old building even then, when I did it in the early 50s. It's long since become part of the RMIT. I think it's probably been demolished anyhow, but the campus is part of where RMIT is in the city now. So all pharmacy students went through that 4-year course, an apprenticeship in the pharmacy, and then qualification and moving around, working in different pharmacies for quite some years. After that, I decided to end my career by being in the public service, in the state public service, in the health department, in which there were a team of us who monitored the use of drugs and poisons in the state. It was a most satisfying job. Had its challenges, obviously, but I look back on it with much joy and satisfaction.
We seem to forget as a general population that when we go to a pharmacy, we're actually buying poisons, aren't we?
We are indeed. Now, not many would admit that or say that, but there is an official list, in fact 8 lists, maybe even 9, of poisons that include your common medicines and drugs. So they're officially known as poisons.
And S6 is a notable code, is it not?
S6, Schedule 6. It depends on what you mean by notable. S6, when I was around, was the domestic industrial type poisons, not the medicines. The medicines were in Schedules 2, 3, 4 and 8. And the others that I've missed out were the more domestic industrial type poisons.
Okay, now as a pharmacist, the law impacted on you. So what was it that you were forbidden to dispense from your pharmacy when you were a pharmacist?
Oh, forbidden to dispense? Well, you could obviously not dispense anything that wasn't on a doctor's prescription if it was in Schedule 4 or Schedule 8, if that's what you mean. There was nothing that you weren't forbidden to dispense if it was properly authorised by a doctor.
All right, what about syringes?
Well, we didn't normally call that dispensing.
Oh, okay.
But there was a time, yes, for quite some years, where to help people who were drug addicted to get off their addiction, syringes and needles were not to be given or sold, or if you like, dispensed to other than genuine needers, genuine users of it, like diabetics. People had to, in effect, show you or prove to you, and it was fairly easy to do that they were diabetics and they needed it to self-inject their insulin.
Okay, so here you are, not handing these things over the counter, and then the law changes and you couldn't refuse if someone asked.
That's right, yes. The edict from our authority, the Pharmacy Board, changed abruptly, and that where it was not permitted, now it was not permitted that you refuse to give that, so that it would now help the addict to get what he wanted and perhaps save doing something illegal to get them, to steal them or to commit a felony to get money to do what he wanted.
Well, on that note of confusion, we'll take a break. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after this break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Speros Katos, a pharmacist. And Speros, you were saying that an edict had come down and something had changed about what you did with syringes.
Yes, the Pharmacy Board, the governing body of pharmacy practice, had, it seemed to me, quite suddenly reversed their position in favour of the drug-dependent person, for fear that they may do worse if their needles and syringes were restricted, that they made it mandatory that all pharmacists supply these to anyone who asked for them, including, of course, drug addicts and people who genuinely need them, of course, yes. Continued on. And that was a bit upsetting to some.
And they had some power behind that edict?
Indeed they did, yes. As I said, the governing body, that they could call you before them for disobeying that edict, and you could be fined. The very worst that you could do could be deregistered. Yes. Wow. That probably wouldn't happen in this case, but that's theoretically what they could do in breach of their edicts.
Well, I guess doctors find themselves in a sort of similar situation. Absolutely. Where the law actually has been changed, and so they must refer a patient on to another doctor for an abortion or to perform it themselves.
Exactly the same thing, exactly the same principle.
And they take this Hippocratic oath of not performing an abortion, yet the law of the land or of the state says that they must. So must be awkward for many as far as a vote of conscience. And talking about that, you told me a story about once upon a time there was a thing called little green label pills. Tell me about where conscience played a part.
They were fairly widely sold in pharmacies many years ago. Thankfully they were banned by the authorities themselves. But they were commonly used by people who wanted a cheap abortion, who didn't want to go to an abortionist or backyard person. These were fairly drastic laxative tablets that people could well have said, I've got strong constipation, I need a drastic laxative. And therefore they would get in under the radar, so to speak, because abortions in that time, this is 50, 60 years ago, were illegal. And so people got around it this way. And it dawned on me as a young pharmacist what was happening. And so that made me very wary of supplying them. It really meant asking a person why they needed them, and that's obviously a bit embarrassing. But before I could decide one way or another, the law stepped in and helped me out, because I was quite unable to, in the light of conscience, to supply them for that purpose.
Yes. Now, conscience plays a vital role within all of us.
Of course.
And your conscience is based on what kind of worldview?
Oh, clearly the Christian worldview. Mm-hmm. I was brought up in a religious home. My mother was quite strongly religious, not so my father, I'd say. He was a good man, but not inclined to religion. My mother was in charge of religion in the home, and she wanted to be sure that both of us had religion, the Greek Orthodox faith. Mm-hmm. But by the providence of God, both my sister and I were invited to a Sunday school in our area in St Kilda, where we were brought up. And there I heard the Christian message in a way that even a child could understand, and I warmed to it and accepted it, and haven't looked back since. So clearly, as a young man now in pharmacy, any matter of conscience like this was educated by the Christian worldview.
Yes. And you also, in recent years, have been involved in a TV program going under the name of Zondas. Now, what does Zondas in Greek mean?
Zondas means living. It's a participle, living. And we add on the term 100%. So Zondas, 100%. And we, on that program, that is on the same channel that we're on now, we believe that living 100% is only possible by faith in Jesus Christ and His gospel, His word.
So supporting life and an abundant life at that.
Absolutely.
Life is precious.
Yes.
So let's come back to where there might be a young woman with an unexpected pregnancy, viewing the program tonight. And here we are, we're talking about life, the Zondas. What would you encourage her with her decision making?
Well, I'd encourage her strongly to not have an abortion, not destroy that very precious human life that's within her. We can't deny, as much as we might like, to deny that this is a human life, even though it's so small or tiny. We all went through that process in our own life. That's how we started. We would not be here if our own parents had thought the same way as many people do today. To respect that life as God-given and to bring it up. And if it's impossible to keep that precious life when it's born, maybe there's another couple that are dearly wanting to embrace it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a positive suggestion there to ask them to consider. the life that they're carrying, and to, in their own consideration of themselves, to be more full and responsible to care for that child. And there are those in community who will support them.
Yes, I'm thrilled to know that there are agencies that people can ring or contact that will give them support.
Well, thank you for that.
That should be sought out.
Yes. You've been watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Speros Katos. So here we are in the final lap of our discussion.
Yes.
Why did you choose pharmacy all those years ago?
What a good question. You know, that was asked of me by the team of 3 teachers or lecturers who checked on each new pharmacy applicant. Why did you choose pharmacy? And I wondered to myself, how do you answer that? How do you answer or explain what you like as distinct from what you don't like? I simply said to them then, and I don't think I could say anything better now, that I had a particular liking for chemistry, physics, biology, which I did in my final year at high school, and pharmacy was an extension, in effect, one extension of those 3 subjects. I just had a natural liking for them, as distinct from, or in contrast, to history and languages then. Now I love them. I'm just sad I didn't do any more study in those, but you had to choose. You're either going to be a scientist or you're going to be a historian. Yes. You're going to do arts or sciences.
Yes.
And so I had that liking for chemistry and still have. And I must say, add to, the idea of therapeutics, a study of something that brings therapy or healing, as drugs do, not quite as well as, say, a doctor would, but that attracted me too.
Okay. What are some of the good news stories out of your history and years as a pharmacist?
Oh, I'd say there'd be many stories, many little stories of someone coming in with a complaint that they wanted treatment for, rather than going to a doctor, making an appointment, paying the fee, getting a prescription, where they could short-circuit that, come into a pharmacist who was a kind of a little doctor in their eyes, who would treat minor things, and recommending an ointment or a cream or some medicine, and then coming back later on and saying, what you gave me just suited me fine, just helped me. That was a thrill. Now, little things like that.
I think life is made up of a lot of little thank yous.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Makes the world go round. So here you are with grandchildren. How do they make your world go round?
Well, our grandchildren are a delight. It's quite a range. We've got our eldest about 22 or 3 and our youngest 3. So there's quite a range there. And we often see our little one. My wife helps to look after her, therefore giving a bit of rest to Mum. And they're just delightful to be around. They're just great kids.
It's hard to imagine, now that you have them, not having them?
Fairly hard.
Yes.
Fairly hard, yep. It's only 23 years, and there's a little bit more to life than 23 years. But yes, they've just been great to have around, I'd say. They've just been good kids.
So this gift that we're all entrusted with, and we have the responsibility that when a life comes our way and we have the opportunity of having a child, raising a child, making the sacrifices necessary to keep that child, the joys outweigh the general human condition of the mundane and the nappy change and all of those things.
Yep. Yes, we were in a position where we had to advise our daughters who had considered not having or proceeding with their children, strongly advised them to continue, and we're thankful that they listen to that advice.
Yes, yes. Well, that's a blessing to have that relationship and to work at it. You'd have to work as a parent and as a grandparent on these new roles that you're given at this stage of life.
Yep. The precious gift of life. Yep. That should be retained by all means. And I'm rather heartened by the fact that, as I mentioned before, and as you brought out the question, that if a lady finds herself pregnant and feels that for some reason can't continue that pregnancy, just think that there are people out there who are dying, so to speak, to have a precious infant that they can't have themselves and that they can bring up. And I believe that this idea of adoption is gaining a bit more force again, because it's been in the doldrums here in Australia for some time. And I read that there are moves afoot to revive it again.
Well, that's interesting. Now, I haven't been reading and I haven't been looking at that, though I've always supported more space for adoption. Is it just not a popular subject, adoption?
Well, I fail to understand why it isn't, because there just are people around. They've got to go to great expense with IVF and a little bit of trauma involved with that, whereas there are precious infants around that can be just taken up, so to speak, ready-made and loved. I've met people who have been adopted and they won't go back to their normal mothers, having met them, of course, 20, 30 years after the event. It's natural that they would stay with their adopted parents. They're very happy with them. And so I can't see why this shouldn't be fully revived, rather than people going overseas.
Yes. The overseas situation, it's been a need that's often painted in the media. And there's great suffering overseas, a great need, abandoned children, by the orphanage load. But here at home are the children waiting to be adopted, and I think most things start at home, don't they?
Yes. It's sad to think that in our country, 80 to 100,000 young fetuses are being aborted, whereas they could easily be adopted. It just seems criminal to me that this should continue.
Well, I think we'll consider that and conclude our discussion. You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.